My name is Ben Richards. I'm with the NOAA Pacific Islands Fisheries Science Center, Fisheries Research and Monitoring Division. And I'm going to talk to you tonight about the new main Hawaiian Islands Bottomfish Fishery Independent Survey that we started in 2011 and really implemented in 2016. So for those of you who don't know much about the stock assessment process, the stock assessment process is something that we do to provide scientific information to managers about how many fish are out there in the environment, how fast they're growing, how many babies they're producing, and then also catch information, how many fish are being caught out of the environment. That all goes into a population model that gives a stock status, how many fish are out there, how many are being caught, and that's used by managers to set the annual catch limits or the quotas that all of the commercial fishermen here in Hawaii have to abide by. And so what I'm going to talk to you tonight about is this abundance piece. That's what I do, is I try to help generate data that gives us a better idea of how many fish are out there in the environment. And the reason that we're doing that is historically all of the stock assessments have relied on what we call fishery dependent or catch data to estimate how many fish are out there in the environment. And that works fairly well, but it's a little bit interesting to both be using the catch data to estimate how many are coming out and how many are there. And we as the Science Center are always trying to improve the data that goes into the stock assessments. So that was really one of the reasons why we started on this project to develop a fishery dependent survey, fishery independent survey, I'm sorry. The fishery dependent data, like I mentioned, the catch data, it works fairly well for estimating abundance, but it can be biased. If you are catching a certain amount of fish in this area or a certain amount of fish this month, and you catch less next month, it might mean that there are fewer fish out there. But it might mean that the cost of fuel has gone up, so you decided not to go as far. It might mean that the weather was really bad, so you decided not to go out. Or it might be that the price of tuna went up, so you decided not to fish for bottomfish, but to fish for tuna instead. So back in 2004, we hosted a couple of workshops on bottomfish stock assessment. And out of those workshops, it was recommended that we start looking at implementing what's called a fishery independent survey. Basically, somewhat like the US Census, where we actually go out and count people. We wanted to see if we could actually go out and count fish out in the environment independent from the commercial fishery. And this is a fairly tall order because Hawaii is fairly big. And bottomfish, what's called the essential fish habitat, or the type of area that bottomfish need to live, grow, reproduce, has been defined historically as the 75 to 400 meter depth range around the Hawaiian Islands. So that's about 7,000 square kilometers, extending about 550 kilometers from the big island of Hawaii up to Niihau. And so we had to figure out how are we going to survey that. Well, we started out trying to figure out what gears we were going to use to survey it. Bottom fishermen in Hawaii traditionally go out in boats sort of like this, and they use hooks and lines, either hand lines or powered lines, to catch bottomfish that then go to the auction, that then go to restaurants and grocery stores around. That's where you get your paka, your onaga, your ehu, your gindai, your lehi. And that's what when I talk about bottomfish, I'm talking about the deep 7 stock. So that's 6 species of deep water snapper, 1 species of deep water grouper. Basically the big red fish that you see at really nice restaurants, that you might see on your tables around the holidays, things of that sort. So we knew we wanted to incorporate research fishing into the survey. But we also wanted to look at some other gears aside from just fishing, and I'll talk a little bit why later. So we looked at a video lander, which is basically a stationary camera system, a video camera that would go down to the seafloor, record video of bottomfish, come back to the surface, and then we could download it. We looked at a AUV, or an autonomous underwater vehicle, which is basically a robot submarine that has the same type of camera systems as on this video lander, but which can go around the ocean floor and sort of search for bottomfish in different areas. And then we also looked at what's called active acoustics, or EK60, and that's basically your glorified fish finder that goes on a fisheries research vessel, sending down sound waves at many different frequencies, receiving the returns, and they can get some idea of what they're looking at in terms of species, in terms of numbers, in terms of size. So we were comparing all these different gears to see which ones we wanted to use in the survey. Each one had strengths and weaknesses. So this is what an EK60 plot looks like. So this is the acoustics. This is your glorified fish finder. And what you're seeing here is this is the sea floor right here. This is just a false return. It's a secondary echo off of the sea floor. And this right here is fish. And given that it's yellow, and given that it's sitting right on top of this mound, that's probably a paka, what they look like. But we're not totally sure, because a lot of the fish species, especially of the deep 7, look very similar acoustically. It's very hard to tease one species out from another. But we can cover a huge amount of area. You can basically mow the lawn across the entire Hawaiian Islands and get a pretty good idea of what's where. We can sample the full water column. So if the fish are near the surface, we see them. If they're close to the bottom, we see them. And we can get good biomass estimates. When we talk about stock assessment, when we talk about setting commercial quotas, generally we're talking not in numbers of fish, but in pounds of fish. So whenever we're doing our surveys and we're counting fish, we have to have some way of turning that number into pounds. And I'll talk a little bit about how we do that later. The robot submarine that I mentioned, this is sort of a little video that shows what it sees. It has some strengths. It has what's called stereo cameras on it. So it has 2 cameras that are separated by a certain distance. So they operate quite a lot like your eyes. We have binocular vision. So we can not only see fish and identify what species they are and count them, but we can also measure them. Because we get the 2 stereo streams, we bring them into a computer program, we can put a little dot on their nose, a little dot on their tail, and for those who remember their geometry, you can calculate the Euclidean distance between those 2 points, which happens to be the length of the fish. We can cover gradients in habitat, so we're not just looking at a point in space, but we can actually go from here to there. But it's about $750,000. So we only have 1. So in terms of surveying the entire main 8 Hawaiian Islands, that's going to be somewhat challenging. I mentioned cooperative research fishing. So this is contracting commercial fishermen to go out into the waters around Hawaii and catch fish for us. Some advantages, well, we have a pretty good idea of what the species are because we're holding the fish in our hand. We have a pretty good idea of their length because we can measure them with a tape measure. We get a pretty good sample number because we have 6 different fishermen that are working with us all around the Hawaiian Islands. There's a direct tie-in to the fishery because they're fishing in much the same way that they would fish if they were fishing commercially. We have standardized their methodology, so we spend a lot of time working with the commercial fishermen to come up with a method that they thought was a good fishing method for catching bottomfish, but was standardized across all of the fishing vessels because we wanted to make sure that if Captain A was catching a lot over here and Captain B was not catching a lot over there, that it was actually because there was more fish here and less fish over here, not just because he was fishing with 4 hooks and he was fishing with 10 hooks. So each of the vessels fishes with 2 lines. Each of the lines is baited with 4 hooks. All the hooks are the same size. Half of the hooks are baited with squid. Half of the hooks are baited with fish. They go to predetermined spots that we tell them to go. They fish for 30 minutes, regardless of what they're catching. If there's no fish there, they read a book. If they're catching fish left and right, after 30 minutes, they still have to stop, which they really don't like. Then I mentioned the stationary video lander. This is something that we developed. It's called the MOUSE, the Modular Optical Underwater Survey System, because we're the government, we have to have an acronym. And what you have is you have 2 camera heads, one right here, then you have a battery, and you have a digital video recorder, which is basically a glorified VCR. It goes into this little cage that protects it when we bang it against the side of the ship or run it into a rock or something like that. In the water, it looks like this, where you basically have an anchor down on the bottom. Then you've got about 15 feet of line that come up to the camera system. Then you've got some subsurface floats that keep it nice and taut in the water. And then you've got the rest of the line goes all the way up to the surface to some big floats on the surface so that we know where it is and can pull it back up to the surface. Now, why did we want to use all these different gears? Why didn't we just have the fishermen go out? Well,
how deep does that go?
So that uses only ambient light. We don't use any artificial light. So in Hawaii, that means we can go down to about 250 meters. They're very light sensitive, grayscale machine vision cameras. They're not cheap, but they do let us go down to about 250 meters without using any artificial light. Because we don't want to use artificial light because artificial light might attract some fish, might scare away other fish, would bias our counts. In each of these gear types, if I use a camera to take a picture of the people in this room, if I use a camera with a telephoto lens, I'll think that there are 4 people in the room. If I use a camera with a wide angle lens, I'll think that there are maybe 50 people in the room. So basically each of the gear types that we use gives us a slightly different picture of the truth that's out there. This is just some completely made up data, has absolutely nothing to do with reality. But what we have is here on the x-axis down at the bottom, we have sizes going from 0 centimeters up to 100 centimeters, and those represent fish lengths. And then on the y-axis here, we have numbers. So this is what's called a size frequency distribution. And so gear 1 might give us a size frequency distribution for a particular species of fish that look like this. And maybe this is from fishing. And fishing uses a hook of a particular size. So if fish are too small, they're not going to be able to get their mouths around the hook. So we're going to be missing any fish down in this area. Maybe we have a better system, camera system or something, that has generally the same shape to the size distribution, but just catches a little bit more. Maybe they're using a different type of bait. Maybe they're using a different hook size, something like that. So it gives us a different picture of reality. Then we might use a camera system, which for some reason doesn't pick up the larger fish, but picks up a lot of the smaller fish that aren't taking a hook. And so by using all these different gear types, we can build up a picture of what reality actually might be that contains the full size distribution of the fish that are out there in the environment. So that's why we use all these different gears to sample the fishery. Now, after that was basically the work that we were doing from 2011 to 2015, was testing all of these gears out in the environment, trying to develop what we call gear calibration factors, which allow us to say, okay, if we go to a particular area and we use the research fishing gear and we catch X, if we had used the cameras, we would have caught Y. So we have to develop all of these calibration factors so that if we're using one gear in one area and another gear in another area, we can put all of that data together. Because we do use the gears in different areas. As I mentioned, the camera gear can only sample down to about 250 meters because of light. We know that bottomfish go down to about 400 meters. So for the 250 to 400 meter range, we can only use research fishing. We do sample all around the main Hawaiian Islands, both inside and outside of the bottomfish restricted fishing areas and other closed areas. So within the restricted fishing areas, we want to primarily use the cameras because we don't want to be taking fish out. So after the 2015, looking at all the data, we basically decided to standardize on cooperative research fishing and the stereo video camera lander as the 2 gears that we would use for the survey. As I mentioned, the seabed AUV, the little robot submarine, was great, but we only had one of them. We weren't really going to be able to use that across the whole main 8 Hawaiian Islands. Active acoustics, it was great. We could get a whole bunch of data, but we didn't really know what we were looking at. So it wasn't terribly useful. So we decided to keep those both in research and development, let the people that are running those projects run with them for a little bit longer. If they could start getting us more data that we were sure of, then we would start incorporating them. But right now, we're just using research fishing and the stereo camera lander. Then we had to decide where we were going to put these. As I mentioned, the fishermen go to locations that we tell them to go. We give them GPS coordinates, and we say, go here, fish for 30 minutes. Likewise, the camera teams, we say, go here, drop the camera in the water, leave it on the bottom for 15 minutes, bring it back up. So we use what we call a stratified random sampling design, and that lets us go to the fewest areas possible and get the most precise data. So it's a way of building in efficiency. In order to do that, you divide the environment up into a series of categories or strata. So we have strata that are defined as hardness, how hard the seafloor is. Is it sand or is it rock? Is it high slope or is it low slope? Is it flat or is it steep? And how deep is it? And you'll see we have various categories within those. So we have hard bottom or soft bottom, high slope, low slope, and depth. 75 to 200 meters, 200 to 300 meters, 300 to 400 meters. So I've gridded the entire main 8 Hawaiian Islands into 25,792 500 by 500 meter grid cells, and given these attributes to each of those grid cells, which you see in the color coding here, where green might be hard bottom, high slope, medium depth, purple, soft bottom, low slope, deep depths. So we have the entire main 8 Hawaiian Islands gridded and classified in this way. Now we have a limited number of ships and boats and people and time, so we can only sample some of those. So what we do is we look at how much time, how many person days we have available to go out and sample the environment, and then we sample it in proportion to the amount, in proportion to the prevalence of that strata in the environment. So if we know we can go out and we can hit 100 grid cells, well, if in the total environment, 50% of the environment is hard bottom, then we'll sample 50 grids that are hard bottom. If 20% of the environment is soft bottom, low slope, shallow depth, then we'll sample 20 of those. Make sense? And I'll talk about how we use that a little bit later. So what does it look like? The 2018 survey is underway right now. The fishermen started fishing August 15th. A little bit of weather delay, but they're about 75% done with their surveys right now. These are the vessels that we use. This is a typical commercial bottom fishing vessel in Hawaii. I talked a little bit about how they do it. They go out to an area, one of those grids that I just showed you. We tell them which grid to go to. They fish for half an hour. They catch some fish. They count it. They record it on a data sheet, what species it is. They measure it. And then they put a tag through its lip and they send it to us at the Science Center. Our life history program takes the inner ear bones out and cuts them in half. The inner ear bones nicely have growth rings, yearly growth rings, just like trees, so we can count them to figure out how old the fish is. We also take out their gonads. We can get an idea of sexual maturity, get an idea of when they first start reproducing. We also, like I said, deployed the camera systems. We have two different types of camera systems. We refer to both of them as the MOUSE, the Modular Optical Underwater Survey System. One is a little bit larger. It looks like this. It gets deployed off of the large NOAA vessel, the Oscar Alton SETI. This large one can accommodate both the cameras and also other instruments that we might want to put on it. We're experimenting with a 360-degree camera. We're experimenting with some other current profilers and things like that to get some more information about what's going on down there. This is what it looks like going into the water. Basically, it gets deployed from the crane. There's a quick release, and then it goes down to the bottom. Depending on where we are, we may have a surface tether on it that has buoys at the top. When we go back and pick it up, we can grapple those with a grappling hook, put it into a standard pot hauler, and lift it back up to the surface. If there are areas where we don't want to do that, either because there are a lot of whales in the area or something like that, then we just let it go down to the bottom. There's an acoustic release between the camera and the anchor. So when it's time for it to come up, we can go close to it, send down a sound code. It releases the anchor and then comes back up to the surface and we can pick it up. We also deploy them off of small boats. So we have a smaller unit that's about 45 pounds, not 75 pounds maybe. We put 2 of them in each of these small boats that go off from the NOAA ship each day. They spend their whole day out in the water just hopscotching cameras from grid to grid to grid. So they'll drop 1, drop 2, pick up the first one, go drop it, pick up the second one, go drop it in another spot, and they do that all throughout the day. Looks something like this. You see, those are the 2 little subsurface floats. The anchor is connected to the bottom of the boat already. Just before they release the camera, they'll let the anchor go so that it's holding, and then they'll let the camera go, and the whole thing will go down to the bottom. And there it goes. So the cameras stay down on the bottom for about 15 minutes, and this is what we see. So this is a group of kale. This is off of the Wahine coast of Oahu. This is about 100 meters down or so. And so this is the right-hand camera stream. There's also a synced up left-hand camera stream that we have also, and that's how we get the stereo measurements.
Is that a bait trap they're going after?
Yeah, so we have right here, we have 2 things. One is a little light sync right here, and it's a little LED diode that goes around once a minute. And that's if for some reason the left and the right stream get out of sync. They're not perfect, they're pretty good, but if they get out of sync, then we can use that to sync them back up. And then right here, we have a little, there's a little palu bag that has about half a pound of a 50-50 mix of squid and anchovies, which is the same palu that the commercial fishermen use. And what that does is it basically, if there are fish behind the camera, it brings them in front of the camera where we can see it. It doesn't seem to attract them from far off, which is important. Because we want to make sure that the fish that we're counting are the fish that are in the immediate area, not fish that are coming in from far away, which is also why we limit it to 15 minutes on the bottom. Here's some kahala, some kale, some paka. We see little baby sharks from time to time.
They're babies?
Yeah, they're about this long. Some of the bottom can get pretty interesting. We do get the cameras stuck from time to time, and we have to pull them in this direction or pull them in that direction to get back. This is one that was actually stuck down in this little crevice for about 20 minutes or so, and we were trying to figure out what was going on, and we finally got it up, and we're like, oh, that's what was going on. So these are some opaka paka, likewise down at about 120 meters. And then we bring them back up to the surface. And as I mentioned, the cameras are free swimming. They go down to the bottom. We're not getting a live feed. They're not tethered. They're just on their own. When we get them back, we bring them into the lab. We download all of the imagery off of them. And then we have 4 video analysts that spend the next 3 months watching all of the video, counting and measuring all of the fish that we see. So as I mentioned, the 2018 survey is going on right now. The fishermen are out here. So this is showing where they're going. As I mentioned, they go to predetermined spots all around Hawaii. So the red dots here indicate where the fishermen are going to be going to fish. The green dots are where the camera teams are going to be deploying the cameras. They'll be going out in October, October 17th through the 31st. And then the yellow dots are the grids where we'll be deploying both the cameras and the fishing gear. We always deploy about 10% of the grids have both gears. That way we can always do the comparison, make sure that the calibration factors that we determined are still being stable. Just give me an idea of what it looks like around Oahu. This is where we're going to be going around Oahu this year. So you see we get pretty good saturation around most of the islands. And what this allows us to do is look at spatial distribution of fish around the main Hawaiian Islands. So this is an example of where we saw a paka over the past 2 years. And then, as I mentioned earlier, this is an example of some areas that we might sample. And so when we get the data back, we can get the number of fish that we saw in each of these grids. And so then we can plot that up, and we can get an average number or an average density of each species within each strata. And then, because we have the whole main 8 Hawaiian Islands gridded out, we can generate maps like this, which are predictive maps of bottomfish biomass across space, where the lighter color reds here are fewer bottomfish and the darker reds are more bottomfish. And all of those abundance estimates are what go into the stock assessment. And the 2018 stock assessment, which just came out, is the first stock assessment to use the Fishery Independent Survey data to anchor the numerical models that we use to estimate how many bottomfish are out there in the environment. It did not significantly change the model estimates, but it did greatly reduce the uncertainty in the models. So both of those are nice. If it had produced a totally different result from the numerical models, we would have been a little concerned and a little confused. But because it reduces the uncertainty, it makes us much more confident in the model estimates, which means that when it goes to managers, they can be more confident in the estimates, which means they don't have to buffer the ACL, the annual catch limit, quite as much. So from the 2018 assessment, we estimate about 17.8 million pounds of deep 7 bottomfish, which that information went to the Pacific Island Regional Office and the Western Pacific Regional Fishery Management Council. We provide the science, they set policy, so we say, here's the information, make good decisions. And they set the annual catch limit at 306,000 pounds this year, which is a little bit more than the previous ACL, which the fishermen and we were happy about. As you might imagine, doing something of this scale is not without its challenges. One of the main challenges, as I mentioned, was the camera systems produce enough video data that it takes 4 video analysts about 3 solid months to go through all of the data to count and measure all of the fish. In a matter of about 10 days, we come back with about 16 terabytes of imagery, about 140,000 images. So the data products aren't available quite as quickly as we might like. But we've been playing around with teaching computers to count fish. So this is some work that I've been doing over about the past 5 years. And what this is an example of is a computer algorithm recognizing, segmenting, and tracking fish throughout a video with no human input at all. So NOAA, about 5 years ago, started the Strategic Initiative on Automated Image Analysis, which I run. We've been able to work with a lot of partners at DARPA and the Defense Department that uses computers to count people, biomedical world that uses computers to recognize tumors, people at Google, Facebook, Amazon that use computers to automatically see products going down assembly lines or pick out your friends in your Facebook feed, things of that sort. A lot of the algorithms they don't really care what they're looking at, but you can train them and tune them for what you want. So we want to look at bottomfish. So another example, looking at one of the bottomfish videos, the computer recognizing, tracking, and counting all of the fish. So we're hoping that's going to reduce the amount of time that people have to spend just looking at video. They can actually analyze the data, process the data, run statistics, things of that sort. And so that's basically where we are in building the fishery independent survey. It's a constantly revolving process where we make a research plan, go out into the environment, test it, collect some data, bring it back in, make some refinements, go back around. There's a number of different groups that have been involved. I'm part of the Advanced Sampling Technology Working Group. We developed the mouse camera system. Then there's the Automated Image Analysis Strategic Initiative, looking at training computers to count fish. The stock assessment program, looking at how best to bring the survey data into the stock assessment to provide better information to managers. And then, of course, all of you all who support the work that we do. So thank you very much. And then also, of course, the people, I go out on the water for about 2 weeks of the year in October, helping to run the camera portion of the survey. We have the commercial fishermen that are out for 2 months doing our work, and then the rest of the year catching fish to put food on their table and our tables. The video analysts that I mentioned that get to look through all of the video data. So a huge team effort. It's been about 5 years in the making and 2 years out in operations right now. So thank you very much. Yeah.
So commercial fishermen
Yep.
are out there looking at, you've come up with sort of these density models of populations.
Mm-hmm.
Those that have been fishing 20, 30 years, do they give you sort of a, you know what, that looks pretty good? I mean, do you use that as all their knowledge?
Yeah, we do. Yeah. When we set up the initial stratification, we worked with the fishermen quite a lot in terms of what factors tend to affect bottom fish distribution. That's where, we came up with those depth categories. We came up with the hard soft, because most of the bottom fish tend to be found primarily in steep, rocky, complex habitats, not in just flat, bare sand and mud. Although we do see a lot of the juveniles in the flat sand and mud. So yeah, we use their knowledge. We work with them in collaboration quite a lot. We have worked with some of them in terms of, hey, I was out, doing my fishing and I didn't really catch anything, but I know one of my, spots that I go to is right over there. And so we're like, oh, okay, well, let's look at the map and see, what's different about there than over here, and, try to incorporate that information into the survey the best we can. Yeah.
What's some of the coolest things you've seen on your video?
Mermaid.
Let's see. Let me see if I have it here.
Anything surprising? Like, oh my God, we did it.
I don't have it in this presentation. We did see a nice 14-foot great white shark at about 600 feet off the north coast of Molokai. That was pretty neat. Also off the north coast of Molokai at about 200 meters, we saw these weird cone-shaped structures that were made up of these softball size nodules, black nodules of some sort. We still have no idea what they are. There's no volcanic activity in that particular area right now. Possibly, but we've never seen them in cones. They're normally just kind of on the bottom. So we're working with some of the geomorphologists at UH to try to figure out what it is. Yeah, we 1 year, I think it was the 2016 survey, we had to completely stop operations for about 5 hours because we had humpback whales going back and forth under the ship. So we had to go dead stop in the water and wait until they went away. And that was kind of fun. Yeah.
How reliable is your image data? Can you actually differentiate between different species?
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, I missed the very first part of your question.
How reliable is
right. So with bottomfish, the algorithm is fairly reliable at detecting fish and tracking them. It's fairly good at discriminating some of the species. Some of the species are fairly difficult for humans to differentiate, so providing the adequate training data is difficult. We've also been using the same algorithms up in Alaska for the pollock survey. We've gotten about 90% accuracy in identifying pollock. We haven't specifically tested accuracy here for bottomfish. We're still training the models.
Did you, like, compare to human?
Yeah, at least with pollock, the algorithms exceed human capabilities. With coral reef benthic photos, where we have downward facing photos of the coral reef, and we're trying to get sort of percent coverage of coral versus algae versus invertebrates. They're equal to the human observers right now. So, yeah.
Are you at the point yet where you can say that this is giving you similar, very different results from the catch data you used to rely on?
So far, it's similar. Yeah, so far it's similar results in terms of estimating abundance, but with much higher precision. Yeah.
Is the uncertainty something you pass on to the manager?
Yes.
So
Yes.
you produce a buffer?
Yep. Yeah, we in the stock assessment, there's the estimate, and then there's a uncertainty estimate, and then there's also what's called a sensitivity analysis, which looks at, okay, this is what we think the stock status is. And so therefore, these are our projections. If catch was 50% higher, this is what our projections would be. If catch was 100% higher, this is what our projections would be. So it gives an idea of how sensitive the model is to changes in catch or changes in life history or things like that. Yeah.
How are we doing with sustainability of fishing?
I
say that we're overfishing.
Right.
Doing a good job.
I can speak specifically to the bottomfish stock. Right now, for the past few years, the stock has not been overfished and is not experiencing overfishing. So that's good. The fishermen are fairly adept at targeting the fish that they want to catch. There's not a lot of bycatch, so that's also good. They have not exceeded the ACL for the past few years. So things are looking pretty good right now. Yes.
Do the local fishermen and other local people in Hawaii respect your work, or do you have any conflicts, or are you guys all on the same page?
We're never all on the same page, but I would say we have a very good relationship. Most of the fishermen that have been involved in the survey for a couple of years, I can't speak for them, but for what they tell me, they think it's really good work. They're happy to be a part of it. They support the data that's coming out of it. They were understandably very skeptical in the beginning.
Yeah.
I come out of New England, where the relationship between NOAA Fisheries and the fishermen is much more contentious than it is here. This is the fishermen's livelihood. This is how they put food on their table. So they're rightly very concerned about things that might affect that. And what we want to do is do everything within our power to ensure that we are all operating with the same goal, which is sustainable fishing for the future. They're fishing now, they're doing a good job. We want to help make sure that they can continue doing that into the future, that their kids can do it, their grandkids can do it. A lot of these are multi-generational fishing families. And we all have the same desire. They have a little bit more at stake. Yes.
Have you done any bottomfish biomass surveys of northwestern Hawaiian Islands? So how would that compare to here?
Right. We have not. The northwestern Hawaiian Islands has been closed to bottom fishing since, I believe, 2010. I'd have to double check. With the implementation of the Hanauma Marine National Monument. So there is no bottom fishing allowed in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. So as part of that, we haven't put that into the survey quite as much because there's not a management need, since there's not catch limits to be set in that area. There has been bottom fish research done in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands in the past, but it's not an active part of this survey.
Just wondering if more biomass, or is it, are we much less here than Tampa? that isn't fish.
Sure. Yeah. I don't have that information off the top of my head. I can get some information to you. If you like, just send me an email, benjamin.richards@noaa.gov. I can check with some of my colleagues that did do some surveys in years past up in that area. Yes.
Does your fisherman ever catch anything that want to catch other fish, like dolphins?
Not dolphins. They're fairly selective in the type of gear that they use. The biggest thing that or the most common thing that they catch that they don't want to catch is green-eyed sharks, which are little dogfish. They're about this big, and so they throw those back. Basically, any of the deep 7 fish that they catch, they give to us for the life history program. Anything that they catch other than the deep 7 species, they put back into the water as quickly as they can so that it can hopefully live and keep on doing what it does. But yeah, they do catch green-eyed sharks. They catch kahala. They catch fugu, which are, or not fugu. They catch little pufferfish. There's we're interested in about 7 species that they catch. In total, over the course of the survey, they might catch 20 to 30 different species, but they're really targeting 7. Yes? So the gear they use, so each boat has 2 fishing lines. Each of the lines has 4 hooks. They're number 20 hooks, if I recall. So basically they have one line that goes down, and then each line has a branch line that comes off with, I think it's 3 meter leaders going to the hook.
What would you call this?
No, it's kind of a modification of what's called the Makidogu rig. But
Specific on the point.
I don't know. I would guess it's pretty specific to Hawaii and pretty specific to this fishery, but that type of rig may be used elsewhere.
How about the bycatch rates for that?
Very low. Yeah, very low bycatch.
Turtle bycatch?
I don't know of any turtle bycatch. I have not heard of any turtle bycatch. Most of this gear is going down deeper than most turtles go on a regular basis, I think, but I'm not a turtle expert. George Balaz would be my colleague.
He's retired though, right?
He's retired, yeah.
He used to be my friend.
Oh, really? Oh, great. Yeah, so I can check with George or Shandao, who would know more about the overlap between the bottomfish range and turtle range.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can ask him.
Okay.
Sorry.
Great.
The other question was the video. You said that they analyze the videos. How many species?
Oh, how many species?
How do they get to train, or how many species how do they identify?
Right. So we have 4 video analysts, and they go through a training program where we have exemplar images, of each different species. They're primarily tasked with identifying the 7 species that we're interested in, because it would just way too much of their time to do more. But that's one of the nice things about the video data is that we have it all in the archive. So we count the deep 7 species. If someone comes up, 3 years from now and says, I'm interested in uku. Have you ever seen uku? We can go back through the video. And that's one of the real advantages of the computer algorithms is we can train a new detector for a new species, and instead of having people go back and look through hundreds and thousands of hours of video, we can say, okay, here's the video archive. We've trained a new detector for uku. Where have we seen uku? And it can go through the whole video archive. A detector, so a detector is the algorithm that produces this little box around this fish. So basically, the computer has analyzed that image and says, I've detected these fish. So in image processing and computer vision, you basically have 3 different elements. There's detection, which is segmenting the target of interest from the background. There's classification, which is, okay, I have this target of interest, what is it? And then measurement, which if you have stereo vision is, okay, how big is it? So we have a a variety of different training sets in the same way that you would train a human analyst to recognize an image. These are basically all deep learning algorithms. If you know anything about deep learning, we're right now using YOLO v3 as the primary algorithm. And so basically we provide the algorithm with several thousand images of each species in all different orientations, and it learns its own defining characteristics for that species. Yes.
How many times do the fishing boats go out?
How many times do they go out? So they will go out pretty much every day from August 15th to October 31st. So they'll go out maybe over that time. Each boat will go out maybe 20 days. And most of them go out in the morning and come back in the evening. Around the big island of Hawaii, because it is so big, there's one boat, the Aoshibi 4, that will go out and stay out for 5 days and then come back at the end. So they'll start up here in Hilo and they'll go all the way around South Point and then they'll come into Kona. And it'll take about 5 days.
But it's only daytime because they don't have artificial lights.
Correct. Yes. Yes. Yeah. That's the other advantage of the acoustics that I didn't mention, is that we can collect data both day and night. Because we know that the fishermen fish for some species during the day, they fish for some species at night. Right now, we can only sample during the day. Yeah.
You mentioned some of the families that do the bottom fishing have been doing it multi-generational.
Yes.
Do you ever get really cool stories from the old timers?
Oh, yeah.
These do good, these do bad, or what they say?
Yeah. Yeah. There's tons of stories out there. We actually have a informal fishermen's meeting over at Pier 38 next Wednesday evening, where we're going to get just a bunch of bottom fishermen together to talk story. And it's just tons of fun.
What do they say as far as biomass before and after, and nowadays, the old times?
It's hard to say, because there's been a difference in technology. There's been a difference in, they say there's been a difference in patience. Bottom fish are not easy to catch. You don't just go out and toss a line. You need to be able to keep a 1,200-foot line from getting tangled. And so their opinion is that there's not a whole lot of people left that are willing to do it. So back in the day, were there more fish, or were there better bottom fishermen that had more skill? Now there's GPS and fish finders and all that. So how does that affect catch rates? So different fishermen will tell you different things.
Overall better or worse?
What's that?
Did they say it was better in the past? Who would have answered? Look as long as we're this big.
Right. Yeah, I think that it'd be hard to speak for them. I think that's sort of a general consensus, but the ones that are really doing it professionally now are still able to make a good living doing it. Yeah.
Any reason to suspect that time of year would make any difference?
Sure. Yeah, we're actually doing
right around August.
Right, we do it right around between August and October. There's been some anecdotal work on bottom fish spawning seasons, so we're trying to avoid the spawning season and more avoid transition between spawning and non-spawning events. We also, the first couple of years, I didn't talk about, we did the survey both in March and in October, and we. It would be interesting, but since it's such a large area to cover, it takes some time to cover that area, and we want to try to minimize the amount of movement that's going on amongst fish in the area, so that if we're, at the beginning of August, if the fishermen are kind of fishing in this area, and then it takes them a little bit to get up here, we want to try to minimize any movement of fish kind of from this area to that area or back and forth, where they might either get double counted or get missed or something like that. So we try to sample the environment when it's as stable as possible. so that we can get the most accurate picture. When we first started, we did run the survey both in the fall and in the spring. We're in the process right now of analyzing that data to see if there's any difference between the fall and spring. So far, it doesn't look like it, because we were trying to decide, do we need to run the survey twice a year? Is the fall the best time? Is the spring the best time? Right now, it doesn't look like there's a lot of difference. So we've standardized on the fall right now.